Everybody has a story to tell. We share these stories to gain insight, understanding, inspiration, and most commonly, a oneness to realize that we're not alone. Sometimes we hear a story and it touches us so profoundly that it stirs something within us. Our hope is that you hear that testimony so that you may be blessed by it. So open your hearts and minds to God's loving grace through My Story, His Glory. Welcome to another episode of My Story, His Glory, Your Testimonial Podcast. Today's episode contains adult-themed content. If you're listening with young ones or sensitive to such content, feel free to skip the episode. I won't mind. Listener's discretion is advised. Being submissive to God can lead to many life-changing experiences. God used these experiences to mold Anthony to be able to receive the gift of forgiveness so that Anthony would be able to give the gift to others.
Hi there, my name is Anthony, and this is my story for His glory. To be honest with you, just about 2 years ago, I was an atheist, and life was all about the things that most regular guys cared about. No different than girls, money, success, cars, just very physical, worldly stuff. But the thing was that what I couldn't get right was relationships, and relationships were souring with people around me, and mostly, especially with people that were very close to me, like my friends, especially my parents. Now, luckily, my friends were very forgiving, and they're still very forgiving people, but I never really cherished that, and the problem was I didn't see that I was wrong, so I didn't know I was being forgiven, so I took it for granted. When I was a kid, I was actually baptized Catholic, and of course, all my life I've heard of Jesus Christ. I've heard of a lot of different stories from the Bible, but I didn't really come to understand him at all. We weren't really practicing Catholics, so, it was just a name to me. And I prayed for very silly things. I used to pray that God would turn me into a Dragon Ball Z character, Goku, and I could turn Super Saiyan and super strong and stuff like that. And sometimes when I'm stuck in traffic and I'd have a stomach ache, I'd pray to God to help me ease my pain with stuff like that. So really that was the extent of it. But 14 years ago, that was when my mom was seeing somebody else that was outside her marriage. So at that time, I was already an angry teenager to begin with, and I remember that very moment. I had so much fury, and I raised up my middle finger and all that up to the sky, and I said, "God, you're not there. You don't exist. And if you were there, this wouldn't happen." So I began walking the atheist route, and not too long after that, really, I went to university, and that was when I was really introduced to the party and alpha male culture. I never knew what that was in high school, and it wasn't until I went to university that started to happen. And of course, once I got the hang of it, I started to date a number of women for short-term, just sexual relationships, that kind of thing. And eventually, I met my to-be wife at the club scene. Of course, the intention was no different from my university days. It really was just to have a quick relationship. So years went by, and at the time, I was actually dating a number of women. That's how I walked this path. One night, my wingman buddy from my clubbing days, he had to go to jail for one night because he had done a big fight at the club, and he was put on curfew and all that, and eventually he didn't care, and he started to go to the clubs again, and he was caught. Now, I'm not entirely sure why at that time, But he wanted to turn his life around. That I understand. But what I didn't understand was why he came around and chose Christ. I was thinking to myself, well, what's that going to do? How's that going to help anything, right? But he invited me to his church one day, and I was like, why not? Let's just go and meet some new people and check it out. Let's see what's going on. And I remember very well the first sermon, what gift box analogy over there. He held a box which was like just a gift box, and basically he compared our lives to something like that. He said, are our lives just like this box? It's wrapped very beautifully. It looks very good on the surface, but when you open it up, there's nothing inside. And at that moment, I remember very well in my head, he said, but Jesus, he doesn't care what's inside this box. He doesn't care what you look like. He just says to us, just come. Just come to his house, and he invites us. And I remember that the setting of that church, it wasn't really a building by itself. They were just borrowing a Catholic school's hallway. And I remember seeing vividly that very big statue of Jesus in that hallway at the same time, and he had his hands out. And the message coupled with that imagery, it just really felt like it really was Jesus speaking to me and welcoming me back, even though I've spent so many years talking so much trash. So I went home and I spoke with Joe, which is my partner at the time. And I remember we had quite an emotional moment over that because she grew up in a Christian family and she's walked away for a long, long time, even longer than me. We had quite an emotional time over there because we just thought, wow, God's love really is that amazing. He'd come for us even though we'd talked bad about him for so long. So I kept going to that church, and all was well until one of the older reverend pastors, he delivered a message like this: science is the devil. Science is the enemy. And after I heard that sermon, I was completely turned off, and I just left that church and really church in general. I didn't want to hear anything like that again. A couple of years later, of course, Joe and I we continued the relationship as we've always done it, and eventually you have children. She gave birth to our first child, Isaac, and really we weren't even married yet at the time. Now, fast forward a couple of years after that, Evelyn, she was born. But as much as it seemed like life was going good and life was really moving forward, I even got a big promotion, a big raise in my career at that time. To the outside person, to the untrained eye, I had a house, I had 2 cars, I had a great career going, I had 2 children. It looked like I was ahead. And really, judging by my own standards, I ought to be happy. But for some reason, I wasn't. At the time, I felt like our marriage was falling apart because we hadn't really ever gotten down to fixing any of the issues in between of us. We'd have these big fights, then we'd have these passionate get back together kind of things, then we'd have these big fights, and we were just getting sick and tired of that whole process. So really, I just decided, you know what, this isn't worth it. So we were going to go for a divorce. And at the time, I was just thinking, what's the point, right? I've already cheated multiple times on my wife. So I reached back out to my wingman buddy just so we could hit the clubs again and to meet new women and just to go back to the path we used to walk. And for some reason, because this guy has been walking about 2 years in his walk with Christ, it was so weird. He was the one that tried to talk me out of it. He tried to talk me into de-escalating with my wife, that whole fighting situation, even though he used to be worse to women than I ever have been. So I thought that was really strange, and I asked him, I was like, is this Christian walk really changing you, or are you just speaking from some holier than thou standpoint? I was an atheist, very hardcore. I always talked bad about religion. I thought people that were into religion were stupid. that they couldn't change their lives, so that's why they have to rely on this imaginary thing. So I ask, you know what, nowadays, which woman can you trust? And then there was this calm but unmistakable voice from within. It said, your wife is a woman that you could trust, and you have been taking that for granted. That particular moment, I don't know why. Even I thought that voice was an unmistakable voice from God. And I don't know why, but I was so happy. I was so happy that I had this big smile on my face, this angry, this bitterness and all that sort of stuff. It just seemed like it magically went away. And when I went home, I was so happy. It was almost like my face was glowing. And Jo was asking me, like, she was actually kind of afraid. And she was like, what happened to you? I told her, I was like, I felt God spoke with me. And she was really, really shocked at that time, because that for the past little while, in her alone time, she had been praying to God. And she was like, God, I don't know what to do with this anymore. Just, I relinquish my control, and just you tell us what's best, what's the best path to go, that kind of thing. And we were both really in shock at that moment that God really came through and answered her prayers and just spoken with me directly. I mean, there was no person. I'm a pretty stubborn guy, and there's no person that can talk me out of this. And right shortly after that, she revealed something to me. She told me that she even had a secret meeting with my dad, and it was secret because she didn't want me to know about it. And she said to me that she asked my dad on 3 separate occasions about that thing 14 years ago. Because I had been, for the most part, I'd been judging my dad. I'd been saying to him, I've been pretty much thinking that, yeah, he has no guts, he has no courage, and that's why he couldn't divorce my mom, even though they had this thing, and she had this thing outside, and I thought he had no guts. And hey, I have guts to get out of my suffering, divorce, I can choose it. I'm not scared. My wife said that what my dad said on those 3 different occasions was, I didn't choose divorce because family is the most important thing to me. And I'll tell you this, I would have never known this. I wouldn't ask my dad this. I already had preconceptions in my mind. I wouldn't ask him, so I would have never known. I probably would have never known until the day he died, and then I could spend the rest of my life regretting about it. But I really saw God's love there, that through this difficulty and through all of this stuff, that this conversation between them happened to happen at that time, right before I came back, and before, right when I was ready to turn around. And I could tell you, I hadn't cried like that in, I don't know how many years. I hadn't cried like that ever since I'd grown up. But I since turned around and never looked at my dad the same way. So I started coming to our church in Pickering, 2017, and it's an even stranger thing that we happened to come across to this church, because my mother-in-law was the person who brought us there. But she was visiting from Taiwan, so she's half a world away, yet she was the one that brought us there. And who brought her there? It was our former landlord. Our former landlord was the one that brought my mother-in-law, who was visiting from half a world away, and she was the one that brought us to this church. And I remember the kind of warmth I had experienced and I had felt at the time when I had first entered this church. And I started to excitedly share my experiences in my journey with my best friend, Anders. Week by week, when I was attending the Sunday service, the pastor was running us through the Nehemiah series, and from there I really learned about what real leadership, mission, and vision looked like. And I just thought, wow, every man was called to be a leader in their family. And I just reflected upon myself and thought, wow, what kind of misconceptions did I have, and how hard did I fail using the alpha male standard to run my family. A little time passed and I felt that, wow, the Christian walk is so hard. It's so difficult. You have to give up so many things, and you have to deny yourself all the time. Sometimes it gets stale. Sometimes you don't understand what you're reading. Sometimes you don't understand what you're hearing. And love was the hardest part, because love was really about the betterment of others and trying to give yourself and to serve other people. And I just thought, wow, it's so hard. And this whole walk is so hard. But I kept on reading the Bible page by page, starting with the New Testament. And I learned about what Jesus stood for. So continuing this walk, it didn't mean that we didn't have any more problems with our lives. I mean, we still had a lot of fights with between each other, me and my wife. But again, the love of Christ that inspires the love of the church, it's come through so many times, and we see it because the pastors have came to talk us out of it so many times. And there was one time I remember I was driving to work and I was just ranting in my head, like, God, what do you want me to do? How do you want me to deal with this? That kind of thing. And I was just so angry, and I just kept going on and on and on. And there was this, instead of that soft, calm voice from before that I heard the first time, I heard a loud, rumbling, thundering forgive inside me that just stopped me right in my tracks. And I realized at that moment that, how hard is it for me to forgive? I just don't know how to forgive. I can't forgive anyone. Early in 2018, I had confessed to my wife that I had cheated on her before a number of times. And I did that because I thought, I had to give her a chance to rethink this, because we were just going to go for a marriage renewal at our church. And I was only brave enough to do this because I know that God was protecting our marriage. Why would he bring us together just to watch us crash and burn, right? So we did this. And amazingly enough, Joe was able to forgive me like that on the spot. And I thought, wow, this is just so incredible. So I was like, wow, I never thought forgiveness, like true forgiveness, was possible in life. But here I'm seeing some of it, that kind of thing. And then later in that same year, I also went to Dubai on a mission trip, and I saw a lot of things that a different perspective that I didn't see from here. And I saw humility, generosity, and dedication of the congregation over there. They work so hard and so many hours, yet they're so dedicated to meeting up to hear God's word. And it was just a humbling experience, and they were so willing to share that kind of thing. And it really gave me a perspective in my life, as well as I saw how fake all this luxury stuff was in life. The story is, I went up the Burj Khalifa and I looked through these binoculars over there, and these binoculars have a view. It has a present view, it has a night view, and a history view. And when you look down from the Burj Khalifa, Dubai has everything. All kinds of beautiful buildings, all kinds of like the rivers and all that sort of stuff. But I look in the history view, and there was nothing but sand over there, and one or two long highways, and just a couple of little housing subdivisions off near the coast. And I was like, wow, how fake is this stuff that mankind has built? And the thing is, this is all all people come to visit and all people cherish, but it's fake. One day it could go away, it could crumble. And I just thought, wow, all this beautiful luxury that I've been gunning for all these years, it could go away just like that. And I started to see something in a different light. I started to see that, wow, hey, my wife was taking care of my two kids in Canada while I was off in Dubai, and everything seemed to be fine. Everything emotionally, they were good, and they were doing. My wife was taking them out to play after school and all that sort of stuff. And I was just thinking, all this strife that was in my house, was it me? I've held on to it for so long that I was right, but I was thinking, this moment I felt like God let me see. Is it me? Later on in the year, pretty much towards the end of it, I attended a Set Free event, and that was a really cool event because I learned an incredible tool just to basically really go deep into past traumatic or even current traumatic experiences and try to discover the lies and the truth in all the events of your life, that kind of thing, and don't let the lies within them hold you back. And I thought that was an incredibly liberating event. But when it came to partner up with people to speak about this sort of stuff, I was partnered up with my best friend, Anders, the same guy that I said I was excitedly sharing my experiences with. He eventually ended up joining the church, which is really cool. But yeah, he came to this Set Free event with us together, and I was kind of actually disappointed to be partnered up with him, because I thought, what's the point of this? I know this guy pretty much through and through anyway. I've known him for 17 years of my life. What do I not know about him? Like, if we were to share, it'd probably be better to share with other people that you don't know that well, right? But then I found out why. I remember telling him that I was actually apologizing to him at that Set Free event, because we do go through people we have offended and stuff like that. And since he was right in front of me, I apologized to him for all these years that I honestly haven't been the best of a friend to him. He's been amazing to me, but I haven't been the best of friend to him. I remember how bad I felt for one particular incident in the past in university when we were doing boxing and stuff like that in my garage this one night right before I was about to go partying. And I punched him so hard in his gut, he threw up on my driveway. And instead of asking him if he was okay, I remember I just started going on this rant and all that sort of stuff. And I wasn't exactly ranting at him. I was just being very frustrated and very impatient in front of him and all that. I didn't say sorry. I didn't whatever. I just grabbed the hose and tried to figure it out and all that, try to clean the mess up, because all it was for me was I was in a hurry to go partying. So I didn't care. I didn't care about him at that moment. My dad had to come out, and he had to pretty much yell at me to say, look at what you're doing to your friends. Look at it. And even that day I was fighting him because I was who I was. I was fighting my dad too. And I just stormed off and went to party because my dad was like, give me the hose and I'll clean it up. I apologized to Anders for this during Set Free. And I was like, sometimes when we're sparring and when we're boxing now, when I'm asking you to hit me as hard as you can, I mean it, because, all these years I've never really said sorry to you for having done something to you like that, right? I was like, you're free to just smash me, right? And you know what he said to me? He said to me, dude, when you're saying that, when you're asking me to do that, you're just doing it for yourself. You're the one that can't let go of this, because I've already forgiven you. And to be honest with you, I've already forgotten that this even ever happened. And that was another moment where I thought, wow, like blank slate forgiveness. It really is possible on earth. And I was the one that could never forgive myself. And I was the one that could never forgive other people, even though God had forgiven them and God had even forgiven me. So we went on and we did this Hearing God seminar for a few weeks at our church. And it was great. We learned different ways to discern God's word. We learned the different avenues it could come and all that, just so we can be clearer to know when it was actually God that was speaking with us. And during just one of those nights there, because I was sharing my experiences of Set Free with my wife, she decided to come clean with me too one night. And she said, you know what, I've cheated on you in the past before too, a few years ago. And I was just furious. I was so mad. I yelled at her for a good half hour or something like that, saying all kinds of bad stuff. And I even punched a hole in my door. We were going to go for a divorce again. That's what I was going for. But I didn't give up on God this time. I realized that my walk with God has nothing to do with, how bad the circumstances of life are, that kind of thing. So my progress at that time was at the Old Testament, where I was reading Leviticus. And honestly, Leviticus was really boring to me. The first a good number of chapters of it, because it was just talking about how to build this and how to build that and how to do this. And I thought it was really bored. But that particular night, I was reading the second last chapter of Leviticus 26. And I remember I was sweating in fear. I was so scared because the punishments listed there, they were so severe. But still, I didn't want to change. I was hurt bad from, knowing that my wife had cheated on me before, even though it was years ago. And so this was another reminder of how hard I just cannot forgive people. I mean, what she did was 3 years ago. she wouldn't do it again. And I actually believe that because she's someone that can quit stuff cold turkey. But at that time, I remember I was so angry with God. I was like, God, why did you lie to me? The first thing you ever said to me was that she was a trustworthy woman and I could trust her. What do you mean? Right? Now that I know this. And the next morning, I was just doing the same thing. I was going to go to work. And while I was walking on the driveway, I heard a voice asking, Anthony, do you love me? And I knew it was the voice of the Lord Jesus. I knew it. So I responded, of course I do, Lord. And I got into the car. I was just, still going on thinking, I love you, Lord, but how are you going to make me do this? I can't do this. How are you going to, how am I supposed to live through this? How am I supposed to forgive something like this? You know how unforgiving I am. That's who I am. And you're asking me to forgive something like this? I was listening to worship music, and I was listening, and my favorite song, it's a Chinese song, it popped up, and it essentially translates to wholehearted worship. And the chorus in there, it goes, I will respond to your love with my life. Oh my Lord, let me solely focus on you and worship you wholeheartedly. And I remember I already was in tears by that moment, and Jesus asked me, are you willing to do this? And I couldn't tell him. I couldn't answer him at that moment. He said that to me, but I couldn't say it. And then he said to me in a very calm voice, all things are lawful, but not all things are profitable. And that's from 1 Corinthians. And then he said to me, I didn't lie to you, my son. She won't do it again. And then he also said to me, remember my covenant with you? Don't forget these promises that I've made for you. There's punishments if I go out of God's will, and that's stuff that I would bring onto myself. But then he also spoke with me through another verse in Leviticus 26, and he said, if then their uncircumcised heart is humbled, and they make amends for their iniquity, then I will remember my covenant with Jacob, and I will remember my covenant with Isaac, and my covenant with Abraham, and I will remember the land. And I just thought through that verse that I just read the night before, he was reminding me that he will reverse the circumstances and the situations and the problems in the life as long as I'm humble enough to come back to him. And this was the discussion that it wasn't just a one-word thing. The amazing thing was this was a whole discussion that I had with Jesus. And my goodness, after the tears went away, I was enjoying it again. It was like that day in 2017 when my face was glowing when I came home. It was the same kind of joy, and I was overcome. I didn't care about anything again. I was just happy. And I started to try to walk a better walk with Christ. I mean, I've always been addicted to porn. Honestly, I didn't know it was an addiction until I tried to quit. So the pastor, he recommended that I install this app on my phone, Accountable to You. And honestly, I am only submissive enough to install something like that on my phone to let them know what I'm watching, because I want to walk a better walk with God. I mean, otherwise, why would I even let someone in to monitor me or even think they can boss me around or something like that, right? When we come to very recently, January 2019, we had another huge fight between me and my wife, and it was no different from the previous fights. And I just thought, this is so stupid. Like we're going through the same thing over and over and over and over again. We're walking as Christians, and we're still doing the same stupid stuff, and we're still walking in our own ways. You know what? We're not going to change. So we talked about divorce again. Really, we didn't exactly live in different places for 2 weeks, but it felt like it. I mean, I was sleeping in the basement. She was sleeping in the bedroom. We didn't even look at each other, that kind of thing. And during that separation, now my progression was to 1 Samuel in the Bible. Now, right here, I use the Bible verse to my favor, where it says, and Samuel said to the people, do not be afraid. You have done all this evil, yet do not turn aside from following the Lord, but serve the Lord with all your heart. And I thought, yeah, you know what? Yeah, I'm doing this evil. I'm doing this divorce. You've told me so many times, not to do it. You've pulled me back. You've really reached down to the depths of my heart to talk me out of it and all that. But I'm doing it anyway because I'm just so angry. So I'm doing this evil. But hey, look, as long as I keep walking with you, it's fine, right? Just like you said in 1 Samuel. And then as I kept reading, we reached 2 weeks later, and I was at the point where in 1 Samuel we saw the lowest point of Saul's downfall, where he raised the ghost of Samuel to talk to him because he was just on a downward spiral so badly, and he was so disobedient to God that him and Israel, they were just going down the path, and God didn't even talk to him anymore. So he raised the ghost of Samuel, and the verse goes, "Why have you disturbed me by calling me back?" Samuel asked Saul. And then Saul said, because I'm in deep trouble. The Philistines are at war with me, and God has left me and won't reply by prophets or dreams. So I have called you to tell me what to do. But Samuel replied, "Why ask me? Since the Lord has left you and has become your enemy, the Lord has done just as he said he would. He has torn the kingdom from you and given it to your rival, David. The Lord has done this to you today because you refuse to carry out his fierce anger against the Amalekites. What's more, the Lord will hand you an army of Israel over to the Philistines tomorrow, and you and your sons will be here with me. And the Lord will bring down the entire army of Israel in defeat." I saw that low point, and I was just thinking to myself, why would I even use Saul and Israel at this point in time? Because remember, 2 weeks ago, I was using this verse in my favor that, yeah, I'm going to do this evil, but as long as I walk with you, it's okay, right? Well, Saul and Israel at that time, they tried, and they failed so miserably that Saul even went down this path to call up Samuel's ghost. And I was just thinking to myself, this is just ridiculous. There's no way I ought to use their model as a model for my life. It doesn't make sense because essentially I'm just walking a path of failure. So even before my wife and I reconciled, I took my work phone because I brought my work phone from work to home so I would look at porn. There was no accountable to you on that particular phone. And that day, after that, I felt like God spoke to me. So I took my work phone back to work and I left it there. And I just thought, I can't keep going down this bad path anymore. Funny thing was, a couple of days after, Jo apologized not only for this fight, but she apologized for everything in the past, like very earnestly, that kind of thing. So I decided we'd throw out some stuff that was like sex related in our house, and I prayed to God. We were on our knees and we prayed to God, like, God, we're throwing this unclean stuff out from our house. We're cleaning house, but please help us, clean our souls, because that's an aspect that's hard or impossible for us to do. And my wife's her own addiction is really playing too much on the phone, that kind of thing, right? But after I was submissive to God in this manner, she started to put down her phone a lot more. And she's taking steps to limit her phone usage, and she's generally more willing to listen and all that. And it was just interesting to me because I did hear a sermon about submission before, that the man needs to lead the way, or else if we don't show our wives what submission looks like, how does she know how to submit to us? So I felt like these words were ringing true in my ears again, because I was willing to submit to God and stop denying, and all that sort of stuff was bringing me back to porn. Now that I'm taking the step to finally admit it and throw that stuff away, she was responding in kind and in submission to me after I've spoken about it on end for so many years, and she never listened, but until now. And there was another thing that I started to see. Remember how I said that I was always judging my dad for not having enough courage in order to do the divorce with my mom and all that, because of that, what he suffered? I started to see the value in my dad's endurance. He didn't only have to endure my mom, but he had to endure me. He had to endure my sister as well. Nobody respected him in the household for so many years. I'm 31 right now, and I'm seeing this now. I'm talking about from my teenage years till now. This is when I'm finally seeing it. But now when we hang out, the smile on his face, when he's hanging out with his grandchildren and all that, I used to always think that my dad was useless. He didn't have a good career. Nobody respected him at home, including me. Why couldn't he just, I would follow him. Why wouldn't he just take me and walk away and start new? You choose to suffer, and you choose to sit there, and you choose to listen to, all this garbage from my mom and garbage from me and all that sort of stuff. Why? And I saw the endurance has paid off right now. I saw how much he has now that he's 65 years old. He's still in good health. He could play with the grandchildren, and he has a smile on his face like I've never seen before. What a perspective change this experience with God has given me, that when he says we have eyes but we cannot see and ears that cannot hear, he's totally right. Because now that I can see, it's unspoken. It feels weird if I were to approach my dad all of a sudden and say this to him. But what's in my mind is like, I'd like to say to my dad, like, you know what, Dad? When I grow up, when I get old, I wouldn't mind having what you have. It's pretty good. So really, this whole experience, it just shows me this whole sanctification journey with Jesus, how he's opened my eyes and all this sort of stuff. And he's increasingly doing that. Then I could get to the point when I'm speaking as well, instead of just swearing and fighting and insisting in my ways and all that sort of stuff when I'm angry. It's really incredible. And really, through this whole time, I just realized how weak I used to be in my mind. And I feel like my mind is being strengthened by understanding what is the standard of righteousness. Before, when when I was trying to make decisions and whatnot, how do you lead? How do you make decisions without knowing what's right? With just shaking, you're just shaking. You don't know what you need to compromise on. You don't know what you cannot compromise on. You make a decision and then you pull it back and you go back and forth again. Without this understanding, it's impossible to lead. I can't make decisions and be firm on them. But now I feel like I can focus on life's mission for that. And I thank the Lord because he is the one that has given me this strength. Lastly, I want to share to you exactly what Jesus said, which is what I feel when I'm saying this to you. Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. I thank the Lord Jesus for making life easier like this, giving me eyes to see, ears to hear, and a mouth that can speak some wisdom, and make some decisions, and stay true, stay focused, and be honorable in promises, teaching me how to be a man. Thank you.
You can subscribe on Apple Podcasts or follow me on Spotify. And if you like the show and want others to be able to find it, please leave a review or rate the show. If you have a testimony you'd like to share or just want to say hi, you can reach me by email at mshgtestimony@gmail.com. I'd love to hear from you. All links are available in all show notes. I appreciate your support. Thanks for listening, and remember, God loves you and has a plan for your life.